Okay, which identities in Season 4 do I need to go through next? Who's next in order? Let's see. Oh yes, Emile Sinclair. Let's start this one off with Dawn Office Fixer Sinclair. Sinclair was suggesting that Salvador try different kinds of tea, asking if his sangla was that delicious, who teasingly answered as if the question was obvious. His Xianbei, or senior, would be back from a contract soon, so he'll open the window wide for her return. Apparently, she'd be making a quick stop at the workshop, but she won't be long. He felt that days without contracts were always so peaceful. He was chatting about the day-to-day goings on with Salvador, the operator of the Dawn office, although Sinclair was worried about the next month's rent with his Xianbei, who should be there any minute. It was a warm and gentle hour, much like the cold dawn that the office was named after. This hour was enjoyed by him. He noted that his progress as a fixer was decent. Learning from Salvador, the wise master, he learned the basics of being a fixer, which will help with working in that profession, along with how to use the burning stigma workshop technique, specifically the weapons that the technology was augmenting. They managed to do the contracts that were picked up, mostly thanks to the others, but he still rose through the ranks, proved that he was bettering himself, but doubt was creeping in. He didn't really get to do anything in that contract either. He knew that Salvador was a smoke war veteran, and his Xianbei took on urban legend contracts. Well, a urban legend contract solo, which made his efforts seem like nothing, but a struggle not to fall behind. They assured him that he wasn't useless, that he was helpful, but this rang hollow. Then they got an invitation to the library, which was an urban plague, asking if he was coming with them, asking if he's going to be of any help to them. This self-doubt was growing, along with his faith in them, doubting that he'd be of any use outside of basic support, seeing himself as unnecessary. He walked into the library with a shallow, selfish presumption. Salvador, who was worried about him to the end, his Xianbei, who refused to blame him for anything, nor show fear of the end, even the Wedge office, who offered to help. All were vanquished by the library and turned into books, with him being the only survivor, the emotional pain overtaking him. He asked himself if there was any point in him surviving. He felt his fabricated heart, commenting that it's not so bad. He considered escaping, reporting what he'd seen to an association and asking them for help. Then he was talking to someone else, who was agreeing with him. None would understand his true feelings. He was gripped by fear. It held him back from moving on. He slowly retreated, asking if that path would bring him nothing but suffering and pain. But the beautiful voice was whispering in his ears as he was withdrawing. Then he wondered if everything that he did was to serve himself, that he'd never be able to forge on as long as he continued to protect and embellish himself with the shield of others. The right path being the honest forward path, a retreat disguised as selflessness. His path isn't righteous. He sees himself as a squalid, hideous person that he's as uncaring and selfish as any other city dweller. So he refused to retreat. If he closed his heart to all, turning his back on them, he questioned if he loved himself more. He shielded his eyes from apprehension, plugging his ears from her voice, silencing his mouth from the lies that he's altruistic. His unbellished reality was no more heartless than his self-serving daydreams. He then turned to the battlefield that he fled from. He unleashed his incomplete EGO, the waxen pinion, on his enemies. Then the voice considered this to be unfortunate. He failed to reveal his true self. He even fell short of full self-restraint. Sinclair didn't think that any would cry for his sorrow. His pain was his responsibility, because it's an indelible stigma. Then the voice mentioned that he gave greater care to his own emotions. He faced his feelings and all of its hellish flames and honed it into the form of a tool, failing to reach his pure self, instead staying human and aiming his sword against his enemies, who thought this was fine. Once knowing someone much like him, one who even for a fleeting moment reached the apex, who ignored that voice the first time only to hear them again. They're similar, so a similar end awaited them. He'd eventually give up and retreat once again. Then it was revealed that this voice was Carmen, and Sinclair could hear her and knew her by name. He admitted that he was so afraid that he wanted to let go of that blade and flee at any moment, but he doesn't want to linger there any longer. She warned that the path was a painful one, not wanting him to subject himself to such suffering. He freed himself from his shell. He dangerously attempted to reach for the heavens with his lone wing, not knowing that the shaky consciousness was the only thing keeping his wing intact with the flames that devoured his emotions like fuel. He was confident against those within the library that wanted him dead. Sinclair felt that his destiny was bestowed upon him. He had to soar. He'd break out of that shell that stood in his way, breaking it and soaring to a higher place. Carmen asked, how long would it be until that solitary wing of vanity melted into nothingness under the cascading emotions? Who knows? But on that day, on the day of his fall, he should heed her words. It's clear that this Sinclair was one role swap with Philip, a fixer working for the Dawn office. A fixer office affiliated with the Liu Association, which is even more fitting as Stigma workshop weapons burn when they hit. It started at the start of the Dawn office section of the game Library of Rowena. Then we got to the Wedge office part of the story, when he manifested his volatile or incomplete EGO, which is called Waxen Pinion, a reference to the story of Icarus, who flew on waxen wings which melted when he got too close to the sun, and then he fell to his death. I remember this story and Sinclair's story. Now, if it goes the same way as it did with Philip, it's not going to end well. Except there is a question regarding Carmen, who is narrating the parts of each of the sinners, and referred to each of the sinners that she was narrating by child. Yes, that's what she was calling each of them. She mentioned talking with one in a similar fashion, in a similar situation. Now, if this was Philip, then this must be the Philip of the main Sinclair's home universe. as this version of Sinclair was role-swapped, which implies that Carmen isn't just distorting those from her home universe, she's doing that to others in other universes. Sinclair was also somehow aware of Carmen, something that Philip shouldn't know, and didn't know, at least as far as I'm aware. So while there is a possibility that when the teleportation device takes him to the... well, it could take him to the 8 o'clock circus where he'd be tortured by Oswald and then listen to Carmen and Pluto, it's far from certain. Next we have the ring pointerless student Yi Sang. Yi Sang saw what he was working on as labyrinthian, unpredictable, completely devoid of any plainly coherent pattern, and unfathomably beautiful. Anything that can be painted and any sense of imagination brought forth to reality. Even things beyond what may be conceived and be used as an inspiration through the lens of art created by others. Seeing it as a wise decision to choose the ring and the path of art. Seeing that his life was a living artistry from its incipience. His interests were a diverse ones, as diverse as the 7 colours of the light spectrum, fanning and radiating in all directions like shuttering rays of diffuse reflection upon an irregular surface, yet the life of fixation with a single subject, technology. Sitting in conferences after conferences of mediocre, predictable discoveries, it was never the kind of life he deserved. He was approached by the pointerless faction of the Ring and offered a place among their ranks. He now saw a universe of infinity, held within a single dot, a collection of dots being a collection of infinities, a concentration of dots being a concentration of universes, birthed anew in yet another ineffably vast universe. He saw that the pointerless created art that he could behold and ponder for eternity. His attraction to it written before it came to be. As a student of the Ring, he was given fabricated wings of freedom, and it unbound his potential. He saw his days in the past before he was a part of the Ring as witless. His wings were there all along, waiting to be painted into existence with his own hands. His infantile, childish self never reached that understanding with his fascination with tinkering frivolous machine parts together, seeing those days as regrettable and wasted in inanity. Wasted in a heedless days, believing that every mired hour spent was his fate. His great brush in his palms was wielded, a tool to mold and transform his past. His pointless past sacrifice for art, which was worthless at that point. But what was worthless was now molded into beauty. He saw that as a student that his skills could grow. If he followed in the steps of the maestros, who had created countless masterpieces, his art would... well, his heart, rather, was lightened by his recent work, so that he could participate in the assignment evaluation without a burdened mind. He then walked into the nearby evaluation site. People were grouped together with various artworks considered revolting to Yi Sang. All they inspired was confusion. Their pleading was made to try and stir his heart, but as far as his hearing was concerned, they were inaudible murmurs, bothersome noise, desperate attempts to receive a passing grade, they all failed regardless. It was all pointless, but this wasn't without answers. He gathered the terrified civilians and told them that they'd be given a holistic critique of their works, of their collaborative efforts, each of their works being an individual effort, yet he can assist them with his passing eye, even if it's unripe. He can make an excellent collaborative piece of art. This made some of them bewildered. Yi Sang would have considered a shared look of shock as plain. With such joy and delight, he wielded his giant, or rather great paintbrush, and rapidly pierced it into his ingredients, marking each of them with dots, explosive splashes of red paint, shock, fear, panic, and desperation. He beheld so many final sentiments as they dropped to the floor with no more mind to guide the flesh. This made Yi Sang's heart swell with that excellent presentation. They prepared for him a beautiful collaborative effort where, even as a spectator, was allowed to partake in its beauty. As for the review of this collaborative effort, it was an A+. Roughly translated, he stabbed them with his brush, killed them all, and made an artwork using their own blood. This version of Yi Sang's divergence point was likely sometime after he escaped Encore, where instead of being found by Faust, he was found by the Ring, and recruited into that finger, where he was part of the Pointillist faction. The Pointillist uses a technique of painting in small distinct dots of colour, which are applied in patterns to form an image. And he excelled in creating artworks, where in the background were paintings of a wing and even League of Nine. As a student of the Ring, he also supervised assignment evaluation, which is basically the taxes of the Ring, where people were made to go there and have their art evaluated, where if they failed 3 times, they're dead. Clearly that group all failed 3 times, and he had them all killed, and also made art by painting with their own blood. This also shows that insanity is an occupational hazard with art, and it's no exception with this version of Yi Sang, as he had a psychotic smile as he killed the thrice failed and used their blood as paint. A student being the equivalent of a thumb soldato, or a middle little brother. It would appear that there are multiple factions based around different styles of art in the Ring, and I suspect that the initiation depends on the art style. That and whether the Ring sees potential in someone or not. Now for the solemn lament Yi Sang. Safety team agent Yi Sang was working on the abnormality that he was assigned to work on, telling it that he's rested well enough. He was often summoned for work, but he didn't despise it, so it didn't need to worry. An invisible bell resounds 2 pleasant high-pitched rings. Carmen noted that it's the only sounds in the containment unit that could be heard besides Yi Sang. The bells coming from the abnormality. Yi Sang asked if it worried that he might be overstraining himself. He'd say that if his workload was worse than usual, yes, it's normal on that day, and as a result, familiar, which makes it passable. Carmen saw that he's engaging in what appears to be a mutual conversation with something, apparently the abnormality with the head of a butterfly, which was directly transmitting its voice to him. Yi Sang found that this dialogue was rather pleasant, a conversation with it seems to broaden his perspective of things. This abnormality appears to be rather difficult to manage. It was the funeral of the dead butterflies. It's choosy with which employee manages it. Those with an unjust heart were wasting their time. Those that were rash of heart would quickly get exhausted. Sang was most fitting to manage it, at least according to Carmen, as he had enough justice and patience, even though he was suppressing the abnormality's impulses. He had a gentle method of engaging in a mutual dialogue, but not forcefully. The abnormalities was likely intelligent enough to recognize this as an attempt to manage it, but it doesn't allow it to bother him. It was rare to find an agent whose mind doesn't immediately crumble upon just talking with it. The bell echoed once. Sang told it that it was merely watching the butterfly resting upon the back of its hand. They had no place to return, so they rest upon it. Asking if this was the case, this caused the head of the abnormality to flutter its wings, which is its way of nodding its head. Sang asked if it perished. Will the butterfly flutter away again? As one sits, only to rise again. Carmen noted that there's no easy way to comprehend what he's saying. He should know that death is not a concept applicable to abnormalities, but the bell conveyed the positive result. He told it that he'll leave now and bid it farewell, exiting the containment unit, standing there in a brief moment of respite. Then Safety Captain Ryushu. Yes, the Safety Captain... The Safety Team Captain, rather, saw that he was distracted. Sang acknowledged her presence through the death stick smoke. She advised against treating abnormalities as people, as this will only complicate things. She threatens SIT. Slice in two? Sang was only giving the impression of it, as she's aware of as well as it. She then told him that he could at least try to hide his grin when... Then she told him that they didn't have time for that as an alarm sounded. An announcement warned of a dawn of violence. First trumpet activated. All suppression units in each department. Sang understood that an ordeal had descended. Ryushu understood as well, telling him to come with her. Sang assumed that there wasn't any need for that. He readied his guns, imbued with the power of the butterflies, and then stood back to back with Captain Ryushu, who was complaining that things weren't going according to plan. Sang asked her, "What does?" She ordered that he stay there and hold the line. If he survives and every single containment unit of that department fails, she'll kill him himself, asking if he understood. Sang made that clear that he'd prefer not to die like that if he can help it. Blasting butterfly bullets as he muttered this. He had grown into a skilled enough employee to exchange battle banter, asking Ryushu if she will assist. Ryushu was heading to the information team to pick up bullets that was moved from the middle layer. Sang understood this to mean the shield bullets that the manager and the Sephiroth fire to protect them. Ryushu prefers the bullets that burst employees. She wanted to see their heads come apart. But she regrets the lack of social Darwinism, seeing that the useful ones get to live. Apparently, Control Team Captain Faust ordered her agents to move the bullet stock from the middle to the upper layer for some information training purposes. Sang understood who she meant. That the training wasn't for her purpose, but to make sure that they can have access to the bullets. This level of preparation, while it's unnecessary for ordeals of dawn, it's meant for a calamity of greater magnitude. Ryushu saw that the execution bullet was a waste to use on someone like him. Yi Sang has heard that Malkuth maintains quite the dangerously high standard for her subordinates. Then Malkuth announced that she'll be in charge of the operations of that ordeal. Ryushu understood that Malkuth isn't smart enough to come up with something airtight, so Faust prepared countermeasures for emergencies like this. Yi Sang understood that the more complicated the structure, the greater the room for holes to go unnoticed. Malkuth added that she meant all of them on the upper there, not just the control team. They can handle this. Ryushu believed her as an employee who can't handle it is no employee at all to her. Where, as far as she's concerned, if you're not good enough, you're dead. Ryushu then disappeared to the other side of the hallway. Yi Sang then turned his gun to the violet creatures, asking the Fruits of Understanding if they've lost their way. All before he fired butterflies at them, telling them that he mourns them, to bloom and be a path for one another to follow. And Carmen added, in solemn silence. In this world, the divergence point is unclear, as it's unclear when Yi Sang left District 19. Well, regardless, he ended up in District 12 and signed up with Lobotomy Corporation. Well, it could be after he fled from District 20, after Dong Rang sold the League of Nine out, and he didn't go with Gubo to Encore. But let's move on. His EGO weapon and suit was derived from the funeral of dead butterflies. His weapon is a ranged one that deals a mix of black and white damage. White damage dealing SP damage and black dealing HP and SP damage. The suit provides protection against white and black damage, but not so good against red or physical damage. Nor is it any good against pale damage, as in that which attacks the soul. It also needs a good sense of balance to be able to wield it without the risk of EGO corrosion taking hold from long-term use. As for the EGO gift, that provides many benefits. However, in this case, the weapons are ranged and deal pierce and sinking status effects, while the suit is strong against piercing and weak against blunt force. These are firearms that have unlimited ammo, but not infinite, as the Living and the Departed, the two ammo types, occasionally need reloading, which either happens when running out of ammo or when blocking. The butterflies in the target either heals SP for those that hit, or cause sinking to occur on them if they're hits. Also, the block provides a shield as well. I suspect that Yi Sang has an affinity with this abnormality, due to him mourning those that have died, but can't put them to rest. Yes. And those that might as well be dead, such as the League of Nine. This identity makes me think of Dante from Devil May Cry. Specifically, what was wielded by one of the sons of the Dark Knight Spada, as in his signature firearms, ebony and ivory. One is even white and the other is black, and neither uses conventional ammo. As for the skills, now, goodbye now, a sorrow in you. The first letter of each word spells out Yi Sang, spelled backwards. As for the combat passives, fire, I shall fire, and I see the dying butterfly, they're references to the 9th and 10th poems of Crow's Eye View, as in the name of his Zayn EGO, the one that's truly his, and also Crow's Eye View is the work of the real Yi Sang, as in the one from our world. It appears that they're at least at day 26, as that's the earliest that the execution bullets can be unlocked. He's clearly capable of wielding both the EGO weapon and suit without risk of EGO corrosion, so he has at least level 3 justice, and he has an understanding of how things work there, how the Sephiroth are, and agents from other departments. Right, let's talk about Edgar family butler Ishmael. The Edgar Manor, wreathed in an ambient sunlight that's full of sounds of brooms and butler boots moving about its premises. Butlers of the Edgar family were busy with their last-minute deep cleaning of the manor. Before the woven hunt, brooms brushing against the floor, dishes clattering against one another, loud bustling footsteps. She's quietly and impassively dusting the window frames during this. She's even focusing on the out-of-the-way corners. Normally, she'd take care of all of this herself without telling anyone, but she needed to warn the others, considering that they're busy preparing for the hunts, to avoid angering their master, Gregor, or even Chief Butler Ryushu. This was her way of caring for the others. She understood how even a small amount of dust particles can be dangerous for Gregor. One of the butlers, the other ones, apologized for this. Ishmael encouraged them to keep themselves in good condition as the hunt was coming up. Ishmael was just worrying about the others, caring deeply for Gregor, not just because he was her master. She used to be a fixer drifting through the back streets, wandering around without purpose. So the Edgar family took her in, gave her a home and a purpose. It's why she doesn't tell Chief Butler Ryushu whenever Gregor drinks alcohol, along with not opening the window when he's at home, out of fear that chill winds would be felt. Her devotion was a blind obsession. One of her colleagues asked if Gregor had been less ill, if he hadn't been hunting for the wolf. Ishmael didn't think so, as he lost an arm and Isabella even before the hunt started, the wolf being Heathcliff. The colleague tried to argue, but Ishmael understood that it wouldn't matter if Gregor gave up on the hunt or not, as Heathcliff would not, as he wouldn't stop until he's taken everything from Gregor. Then she asked if Heathcliff didn't love... The colleague asked who she meant, but Ishmael couldn't remember the name. She didn't know where that came from, dismissing it as unimportant. There was a large hole within her memory where this person once stood, the cause of this misery. There was a fog of memory within her. During this conversation, she dismissed this and focused on the hunt instead, as the sun hung over the horizon. The wailings of those pulled from the other side echoed from nearby, along with the rumbling that intensified within the halls of that manor. The forces of the dead, wreathed under the eventide's orange lights, which swarmed up towards the manor. Gregor saw this even when he was awake, the endless nightmare that sought to claim him. Chief Butler Ryushu saw them as a weak advanced party, seeing that Heathcliff had caught wind of their hunts. He drew his saber and readied for battle, but Ishmael didn't want her master and her superior to endanger themselves, seeing herself as more expendable, telling both to leave them to her. Ryushu said, DBS? Don't... They can take care of them easily. When the warm light was the same color as her hair and it reflected on the floorboards, she looked into their eyes. Ishmael reminded the two that they have a wolf to hunt. Do not let the advanced party waste their energy, to save it for Heathcliff. They both saw her point. She was then wielding her broom and her knives from the dimensional attaché case, that standard issue for butlers. readying herself for battle. We actually told her not to get herself killed. The knives cut through armies of undead as if they were made for butter. The generations-old broom deterred the enemy, routing the forces of their dead with each attack. Yes, thinning the numbers was what she did to the advanced force. Housekeeping didn't make her late for the hunts. In this universe, it's clear that Ishmael, after somehow ending up on the mainland, was wandering aimlessly as a fixer with no known association affiliation. Now, this is likely to be the same in both this universe and the universe where she was recruited into Limbus Company as part of the Damned Dozen. But where this diverged was in that, in this universe, she was eventually recruited as a butler of the Edgar household, which gave her purpose. She was devoted to her master, making sure that everything was clean and up to standard, under the supervision of Chief Butler Ryushu. Now, there's also something else. This universe would appear to be another world where Catherine existed, but almost all memory of her was erased, which was why Ishmael had a vague memory of the cause of why Heathcliff the Wolf was doing this. Clearly, Gregor, and either Hindley or whoever had a role swap with him, was far crueler towards him than Linton and Hindley were in the main universe, as this treatment likely pushed him too far and resulted in him cutting Gregor's arm off and killing Isabella, which made him forced to flee Wuthering Heights due to that to avoid criminal prosecution, rather than due to overhearing Catherine, where sometime after Catherine died, he went down a dark path, similar to Erlking Heathcliff, except it's confined to that universe. Where the Wild Hunt, his ability to summon the undead, was present. Gregor and his butlers hunt for the wolf, as they know that even if they didn't do this, he would continue doing this until he was dead. So in this case, Gregor's hostility towards Heathcliff had good reasons for it. Personal reasons. Well, if losing an arm and your sister wasn't personal, I'd like to know what is. As for Ishmael's weapons, her knives were sharp enough to cut through flesh easily, and as for her generations-old broom, that's unlikely to be a natural broom. It's likely to have some kind of advanced tech on it, something to make it more effective, as it looks like something that would clear up after everyone, as, well, it might as well be set around Regency Britain. But that doesn't mean that the technology has to be at that phase. Yeah, the Gregor of this universe isn't a tightwad. Ishmael was more dedicated to Gregor than she was with Ahab, and in this case at least, her loyalty was not misplaced. Now, before we get to Heathcliff's identities, let's go over Zwei Association West Section 3 Ishmael. The fixer was on the podium, the superior of Ishmael's and the others, was going over the details of contracts that they were taking. It would last 3 days. Nest residents were priority protection targets. Ishmael was whispering a summary of this. She was among dozens lined up in rows and columns in an empty lot, the hot sun blazing over their shoulders. Carmen observed her quietly whispering, repeating the information listed in the briefing by the Zwei Association, her eyes full of fervour. This was naturally a habit for her, due to spending years under a punitive and ambiguous set of laws within the Great Lake, repeating and memorizing whatever information was given to her. It was like a duty to her to do so. The fixer on the podium mentioned that X-Corp requested that M-Corp's Order of the Lunar Visage help them, but they're not a part of this, as They're currently absent on an expedition. Even so, the alloy excavation site that they're responsible for is comparable to the size of a village the village that they were in within District 24. Therefore, it can be said that the difficulty of the mission isn't too... Ishmael understood that there'd be no assistance from a wing. It'd be risky if it's an alloy excavation site, and the size of the area that they're responsible for is... Carmen saw that she was always like that whenever they were about to depart on a new contract. Most others weren't paying attention, looking bored, but she was always fully focused on the briefing. Then, the fixer on the podium recognized Knight Ishmael of Section 3. Carmen observed that Ishmael would ask a question whenever she grew curious about something, just like she was doing now. Ishmael asked if the protection of the excavation site was currently managed by District 24 Advanced Excavation Fellowship and X-Corp Alloy Guardians, understanding that it's near the border but still within the nest. That fixer told her that X-Corp sent a notice of cooperation request. They'll be absent for about 3 days, apparently. That's why the Zwei have been contracted to protect that area, normally under the jurisdiction of X-Corp within District 24, asking if that answers her question, or are there any others? She had no others. Carmen, seeing that she was shaking her head before standing with her hands behind her back, trying to focus on the briefing again. Unfortunately, there was some annoying chatter behind her row. A disgruntled colleague was seeing territory protection contracts as getting old. A whiny colleague regretting not applying for the Order of the Land's End, as that would mean expeditions into the ruins, which would have made things interesting. The disgruntled colleague saw it as pointless as M-Corp was right next door. Ishmael coughed lightly. As Carmen noted, whipping around in the hopes to put a stop to that incessant chatter, her every word dripping with barely suppressed annoyance. She asked if they could please just zip it and pay attention to the briefing. The disgruntled colleague claimed to be doing so. Ishmael was not convinced, as 4 minutes ago the director told them that M-Corp's Order of the Lunar Visage didn't have the time or resources to help them out as they were busy with an expedition. The whiny colleague was unconcerned, believing that the director was just saying that to keep them on their toes, as their last contract had reinforcements, even though they were told there wouldn't be. Ishmael asked them if they knew what they call X-Corp excavation sites. They were hellholes. Literal hellholes. They do have to stay on their toes, as who knows what kind of monster might come crawling out of that dungeon. Seriously, it's... Carmen then saw her curling up her fist and sighed, seeing it as pointless. Ishmael telling them to do what they want, where if they kept going like that, they'll eventually find themselves up creek without a paddle. That! They'll be missing the boats! The whiny colleague told her to quit staring at them and pay attention to the podium. Carmen suspected that Ishmael's threats worked, as she was allowed to focus fully on the director's briefing. But it wasn't long before the chatter resumed. Ishmael gave up on lecturing them. It was better to tune them out and focus on the briefing, rather than trying to get them to shut up. The wisdom of her choice became apparent. Not long after the briefing, a terrifying citizen saw monsters from the tunnels approaching them. They were cornered in a dead-end tunnel. Next to them was 2 dead Zwei fixers. Yes, the same 2 Zwei fixers that didn't look bothered and were lectured by Ishmael earlier. They thought that things were too good to be true. the civilian rather, when they excavated a superalloy microwave from that tunnel. Carmen knew that the various types of the excavation site's monsters and their environments had been explained in detail during the briefing, but those two, they didn't pay attention and didn't know what to do in case of an emergency. So they met their demise. It's the consequence of even a brief moment of laxity in the city. One of the monsters picked up a spiked bat it found in the excavation site and charged at the miner. The civilian closed his eyes, realizing that they were well and truly boned. But thankfully, Ishmael got to him in time. Her greatsword appeared outside of his line of sight, which stopped the spiked bat dead in its striking arc. Instead of receiving a spiked bat to the face, he heard the sound of metal striking against metal. He opened his eyes to see Ishmael, a Zweifixer. He thought that the excavation zone that he was in was assigned only 2 of them. Ishmael was doing extra patrols in the area. Yes, extra patrols, as she had a bad feeling that something might have gone wrong. The citizen advised caution. They already killed 2 of her colleagues. If they kill her too, he's screwed. Another asked what one fixer can do that 2 of them couldn't. Well, unlike those 2 fixers, she's competent. Ishmael could see that, wishing that she could tell those 2, "I told you so," right about now, but it'd be pointless as they're dead. Carmen saw that despite the civilians' worry, Ishmael had no problem repelling the monster's attacks from all directions. At first, the monsters attacked her with abandon, emboldened by her passive defensive stance. But they all soon found themselves rolling on the floor, gripping their arms and howling in pain. The recoil from striking her greatsword was actually hurting them. Ishmael advised them to sit tight until reinforcements got there. The terrified citizen asked how long that would take. She told him 3 days shouldn't be a problem for her. Carmen understood that the serenity of her dry statement heavily contrasted the peril around her. She stood her ground the entire time until reinforcements arrived. She waited for them, and they arrived a few hours later, and they found the civilian untouched and surrounded by bodies of unconscious monsters holding their broken weapons. Ishmael noted that they were there, and Carmen saw that she was polishing her greatsword to get the dirt off its blade. It's clear that the divergence point was sometime after Ahab's disastrous attack on the pallid whale, and Ishmael found herself on the mainland, where she eventually ended up in the west of the city and joined the Zwei Association, which she did in a different mirror world. Either that or she transferred from the south to the west at some point. That might not be entirely unheard of, as she was skilled in the Zwei way of combat, which involved the passive defensive stance, which can be summed up with take the beating, then dish it out, if they don't leg it. Yes, this could be considered a clashable block, much like there's a clashable counter, which will be covered later. Yes, likely some kind of force field like the Kane office employ. And she had a weapon that loosely resembled the Buster Sword from Final Fantasy VII. Can they get away with that legally? As Massault mentioned, metal armor and leather was fashionable with fixers in the West, and the Zwei Association, there is no difference. There are apparently knightly orders in the West, but only those of the wings and associations matter, such as the Order of the Lunar Visage of Emcor. Ah yes, those that produce moonstones that heal psychological damage. Yes, speaking of knightly orders, Durandal, the weapon of Roland the Black Stain, looks similar to the version from the mobile game Fate's Grand Order, and in the historical version and also in the source material, Orlando Enamorado and Orlando Furioso, where in both cases he was part of Charlemagne's inner circle. That's just a few examples and where it's appeared. In those two cases, they were part of knightly orders, and Roland was a part of a fixer office called Charles's Office. Charlemagne. It's a loose reference, I know. Knightly orders are likely part of the reason why in the West, metal armor and leather are fashion choices. In District 24, they're big on excavating alloy from sites, and it's quite hazardous work. The same kind of alloy that the skiff that the Indigo Elder was made of. It would appear to come at a price, and I'm not talking about financial costs here, as the process of making this alloy from excavation sites either spawns monsters that need to be fought off occasionally, or it comes from the monsters that burrow into that part of the city from the outskirts, requiring District 24 Advanced Excavation Fellowship and X-Corp Alloy Guardians to deal with them. And when they're not available, they send for knightly orders from wings such as the Order of the Lunar Visage of Enmacor, or they hire the Zwei Association to protect their sites under, well, at least until protective services under the employ of X-Corp can arrive back there. The monsters clearly have enough intelligence and something, if not opposable thumbs, to be able to wield melee weapons effectively. Either that's how intelligent they are, or there is a possibility they might be mutated humans. Well, that wing wouldn't be the only one to be engaging in shady practices, then. With Faust's Zwei identity, Ishmael was in Section 4. So, if that was at a point in time before Ishmael's Section 3, then it might be the same mirror world. Yes, that would make sense. Great, now that we've taken care of those, next I'll be going over Heathcliff's identities up until the start of Season 5. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!